Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. First of all, just want to start off the episode by thanking everyone for the kind comments and feedback. Finally got a repeat with this team, given that I believe it's been 20 years in the majors at this point. So 5 titles and 18 playoff appearances is pretty good, but would have thought we would have snuck in a repeat win at some point before now, but we have finally achieved that goal. And we're going to be beginning a very interesting offseason for us in the next couple of episodes. But before we get into that, this episode is going to focus on a player who has been with us for every single one of those 20 years at the major league level, who just retired, Dashawn Seifu, who, as I think about it, he might be arguably the best homegrown player I've ever had in OOTP in terms of playing their entire career through. Now you're going to need to have probably played a sim for at least 20 to 25 years to even have a chance of a player like that having had the type of career that Seifu has had. So a lot of times I don't spend that long in a single franchise. But it'll be interesting as I give that some more thought. Would love to hear from some of you in the comments the best players that you've had in the various playthroughs that you've done in the past and what their career achievements were, because we'll be highlighting Seifu's very shortly. But before that, just want to touch on one comment from the past episode that Fake Name brought up. It was basically just about how good our pitching was in terms of runs allowed. And I don't think this was our best pitching performance. Yeah, he mentioned that he usually struggles to get a team to allow less than 600 runs, which, as you can see, for most of the last decade plus, we've been under 600 runs allowed in the season. But Fake Name also mentioned that he scored close to 1,100 runs. And as you can see, I am definitely more pitching focused. The highest we've gotten in runs scored here in Buffalo is 859. Definitely have had years in the past where I've been over 900, but unless I'm playing a big budget team like the Yankees, I tend to focus a little more on pitching and defense. I'd love to come up with a way to generate more offense, and maybe with some of the youngsters that we have coming up through our very robust farm system at this point, we'll be able to do a little more of that in the coming years. But the 572 runs that we allowed this year were actually 20 worse than a year ago. And the best we've been in this playthrough is 551 runs allowed back when we had the 118 win team that unfortunately got bounced in the divisional series back in 2040. So it's been 6 consecutive years with under 600 runs allowed at this point. But we've only been over 800 runs twice in that span. So I just find it a little easier to build a good pitching staff cheaply than an incredible offense. Can feel like I can always build a pretty good bullpen without spending a ton of money. And as the Buffalo Wings budget has gone up through this playthrough, there certainly have been times when I've invested pretty heavily in relievers, both closers, stoppers, and setup men. Sometimes I know to the disappointment of viewers to be spending that much, but I feel like can always build a pretty competent bullpen without spending a ton of money. And as those of you who have followed the series over the years know, I tend to draft pitchers frequently and very high, and it does just become, if you play the numbers game well enough, invest heavily in coaching, invest heavily in player development, I can kind of get that conveyor belt of just churning out good number 2 and 3 starters. An ace like I think we have now in Jim Lance is a little rarer and a little more hit and miss. Can't say that you're going to consistently generate somebody like that every 5 or 10 years, but I feel like I can put together a rotation with a lot of good quality major league starters. Like I said, 2 and 3 guys, have them coming up through my system and build a pitching staff relatively economically overall. I struggle a bit, I think, to do the same thing offensively. Don't know why. I mean, if I probably invested more heavily in drafting hitters rather than drafting pitchers, I don't think there's any reason why I couldn't do something similar. But as a former failed pitcher who could only play baseball as long as he could pitch, given my struggles with the bat as I got older and older and the pitchers got better and better, always have a soft spot for pitching. So that's the reason why I invest heavily in pitching, and it's worked out here. But fake name talking about the year that he had well over 1,000 runs scored, probably gave up some more runs than I did, but there's multiple ways to build 100-win teams. You can do it with great balance. You can do it with a focus on hitting like fake name does. You can do it with a focus on pitching like I do. And there's probably lots of other ways to do it as well. And just one or two other quick points on the team before we get into Dashawn Seifu, which is the reason why we're doing this episode. As I mentioned, Seifu has been a member of our major league team for all 20 years that we've had a major league team in Buffalo. So he's definitely been the key player in this story that we've put together over the past 10 months or so with the Buffalo Wings. Some of you have started asking what my plans are for OOTP 25. Some of you have suggested porting this save over to 25 and continuing it there. It's still definitely up in the air. I definitely want to see through another 5 seasons at least with this to find out if and hopefully when Dashawn Seifu will get into the Hall of Fame. Whether I'll be able to continue doing the level of depth that we've done in the episodes where it takes me a couple of weeks to get through a season. I don't know whether and how long I'll be able to continue doing that, because I certainly am going to be interested in trying something else out in OOTP 25 once the new version is available. And it's only weeks away, but the fiends at OOTP 25, or more accurately, Out of the Park Developments, fooled me a bit this year with that March 15th date, because curses, it's a leap year. So there's an extra day of waiting in between when we get to February 29th. But I'll have to be patient and wait that one additional day because of the cursed leap year. Anywho, I'm beginning to babble. One thing that I did want to mention, since it is a nice round number with the 20 years, we're sitting here with a 1935 and 1305 record. So I think that means we've averaged close to 97 wins a year, which, particularly given the rough first couple of seasons we had with this team when it was an expansion team, is a pretty good run. We've really expanded the budget over the last 5+ years. I think in the last 5 or 6 years, we've had our market size bumped up twice, which has been huge in terms of improving the budget. So we definitely are not running this team on as tight a budget as we were a decade, 15, 20 years ago, which has certainly helped. But all things being considered, 18 straight playoff appearances, 5 World Series championships, and now our first repeat is a satisfying result for the Buffalo Wings thus far. And as I mentioned, we've got at least another 5 years ahead of us. And appreciate all the thoughts on what we should be doing in OOTP 25. Haven't made any decisions yet one way or another, but the one thing I know for sure is that the Buffalo Wings saga has at least another 5 years ahead of it. And as I mentioned, you can't tell the story of these 20 years of Buffalo Wings Major League history without Dashawn Seifu, who just retired after winning his 5th World Series championship, and he ended up winning titles in each of his last 2 seasons, which is a pretty rare thing for a potential baseball Hall of Famer to do. Did a little digging to try to refresh myself on how rare it is in baseball, and it really is incredibly rare. Joe DiMaggio did it in 1951. I believe Johnny Mize did it a couple years later when he was in more of a Seifu type role that Seifu's been in the last couple years, where he's been more of a platoon player. Eddie Matthews apparently did it with the Tigers in the late 60s. I don't think I actually even knew that Eddie Matthews played for the Tigers, but I wasn't born quite yet, so I'll use that as my excuse. But he also was in more of a bench role with them at that point. And then more recently, not that they're Hall of Famers, but Darryl Strawberry and Chili Davis both went out with a World Series with the Yankees when the Yankees were in the midst of their 3 consecutive championships from 98 to 2000. And then certainly most recently, Curt Schilling, who would by rights be a Hall of Famer if not for just the insanity that the baseball writers have turned the Hall of Fame into, where people's personal and political beliefs influence whether they get into the Hall or not. And we let some players who are reportedly in the Mitchell Report and allegedly used illicit and performance-enhancing substances into the Hall of Fame if they were nice to the voters or if they were well liked, whereas the greatest baseball player I've ever seen, Barry Bonds, is not in the Hall of Fame. Not necessarily condoning what he did, but the guy was an incredible baseball player long before there was any allegations regarding the cream in the clear and those types of things. So the Hall of Fame has become something that I'm a lot less interested in than when I was a lot younger, for a variety of reasons. But Schilling is a guy who certainly probably had the most impactful World Series in his final season, in the most impactful playoff run in his final season of any of those players that I mentioned. Although, as I noted, he does not actually qualify as a Hall of Famer quite yet, but at some point in the future, perhaps that will be rectified. And it's pretty hard for me to acknowledge that Curt Schilling should be a Hall of Famer, given what he did with the Boston Red Sox and the Arizona Diamondbacks against my beloved Yankees. But back to Seifu, you can see we drafted him in 2026. He was the first overall pick. You may remember, those of you who were watching 20 years ago, that I was a bit torn on whether to go with him or another player that I thought could be a real good hitter, and fortunately made the choice to go with Seifu. Certainly the input from many of you helped me get to that decision. We picked him number 1 overall, and he ended up with a cup of coffee late that year at the major league level, because he was a college player coming out of Fordham, the new Fordham Flash. And put him in the lineup late that 2026 season, brought him up about midway through the 2027 season, and until the last couple years, he's never really left the lineup. Awards a bit light, quite honestly, for a player who I think should be a first ballot Hall of Famer. You've all seen these little pictures of players with a lot more badges going behind their heads as far as awards. So Seifu doesn't really stack up in terms of the awards, but he was a two-time Gold Glove winner many moons ago at second base. He spent a lot of his career at third base in his 30s, and then has become a DH the last few years. Four-time Silver Slugger. Three-time he was a playoff series MVP. He and Alexis Barajas are the only players who were members of all five of our championship teams, and he was also named an All-Star 4 times over the course of his career. You can see the Hall of Fame metrics look pretty good for him, particularly compared to Hall of Fame second baseman. So he shows up pretty strong in those ratings. Salary history. We ended up spending some pretty good money on him in the middle of his career, but good discounts these last few years, and certainly took advantage of his 3 minimum salary years at the early stages of his career. Ratings obviously don't tell the whole story anymore. He is brutal defensively at this point, and he's been brutal defensively for the last 2 or 3 seasons. Still, actually, for a 41-year-old, would not embarrass himself as a major league hitter, and still actually has a little bit of speed at this point. But he is definitely not what he was back in the day when his contact and his gap power were both pretty close or off the charts, and his avoid strikeout rating was better. Never had a much power, and he never really had an incredible eye. And at one point, his running speed, his base stealing, and his base running ability were all exceptional or borderline exceptional. So taking a look at his career, as I mentioned, he was a major leaguer within months after being drafted in 2026 with that cup of coffee. Spent half the season with us in 2027. And then he had 16 straight years where he played 150 or more games for us before these last couple years where he's moved into more of a platoon role. Had an exceptional 15 consecutive seasons leading the majors in stolen bases. Even Ricky Henderson only did it 12 times, and Henderson's weren't all in a row. So the fact that Seifu led the National League in steals for 15 consecutive years is pretty incredible. He was an Iron Man and a great player, so not a surprise that he played a ton of games every year. And as a leadoff hitter, he ended up leading the National League in at-bats 6 times. He led the National League in runs 5 times, led the National League in hits 6 times, doubles twice, triples 6 times, and he did win that one batting title with a .312 average back in 2035. His best season, at least as far as his WAR, was 2029, when he led the league with 118 runs, 200 hits, a ridiculous 21 doubles, 99 steals, and he also hit .314 with an .817 OPS, which was one of the highest numbers over the course of his career. And 2029 was also a year that he won his final Gold Glove, so his excellent defense at second base back then, combined with his well above average offense, resulted in a monster season for Mr. Seifu. And back to the career accomplishments page, thought that Seifu had a shot at an MVP on a couple of occasions. You can see he finished third in 2027 Rookie of the Year voting. If he had been up the entire season, would have certainly probably had a stronger case there. He finished second place in the MVP voting in 2034. I believe that was the closest he ever got to that award. Take a look back at that 2034 season when he finished second in the MVP voting, led the league in at-bats, had 204 career hits, which was the second highest in his career. 51 doubles were tied for the most he ever had. 14 triples also led the league. 70 steals, which was actually a bit of a down year for him. But in that year when he finished second in the MVP voting, he hit a career high 315 that season. So obviously a lot of black type from the old days of paper books, red type in terms of the way OOTP presents it. And when we look at what those numbers add up to over the course of his career, over 3,200 hits, over 700 doubles, almost 200 homers, almost 1,800 runs scored, over 1,300 stolen bases, career batting average of 290, and a 108 WRC plus for his career with an 84.1 WAR, which for a second baseman should be a pretty strong case to get into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Looking at his 162 game averages, pretty ridiculous numbers. Over 100 runs scored, 42 doubles, 12 triples, 78 stolen bases, and an average of a 5 WAR. So he was a good, solid, borderline all-star type player pretty much just about every season over the course of his career. A little disappointed that he only made 4 all-star teams. It seems like if a player had put together the career that Seifu would have, he would likely be acknowledged as a perennial all-star, particularly once he got into his 30s and he was still very productive and chasing some of the legends of the game. But the dynamics that pick the all-stars in OOTP don't appear to take the Lifetime Achievement Award aspect of some historic all-star selections into account as well as perhaps they could. The real crazy thing about Seifu, and we'll see this when we check the leaderboards, is that he had some huge playoff appearances and performances for us. We talked about the 3 playoff MVP awards that he won, the 2031 Divisional Series, 2035 Divisional Series, and the 2041 NLCS. But similar to Derek Jeter, when we look at his 162 game average during the regular season, and we take a look at what he did over the course of the postseason, coincidentally, he played 161 postseason games, which I believe is a record. And like Jeter, Seifu wasn't necessarily any better in the postseason than he was in the regular season, but he was just as darn good. Over the course of his career, 39 doubles, a ridiculous 19 triples, 76 stolen bases, 14 caught stealings, hit 296, 105 WRC plus, and a 4.7 WAR, which for some reason, even though he played 161 games, over the 162 game average is prorated back to the 5 WAR, which is exactly what he did in the majors. Although he was not a big contributor in the World Series this year because we were playing a lot of right-handed pitchers from the Blue Jays, he did definitely make his mark in the NLDS and the NLCS. You can see he actually hit over 300 in his 23 at-bats in the postseason this year, scored 3 runs, had a couple doubles, and successfully stole all 3 bases that he tried to steal. So he had some monster postseasons in the past. Never won a World Series MVP award, but you can see he hit triples in a ridiculous number of different postseasons. Had 10 steals in 12 attempts in 2041, the year that he won the NLCS MVP award. Scored 10 or more runs in 3 individual postseasons. Had 20 or more hits in 3 individual postseasons. So a very productive offensive player for us who scored over 100 runs in those 161 postseason games that he did play for us. And before we get into where Mr. Seifu stacks up on the leaderboard, take a look at his career fielding statistics. Mentioned he won a couple gold gloves at second base early in his career, and that was certainly his most proficient position and where he spent the first 2/3 of his career until he got into his 30s. And with a 39.9 zone rating and a 1.014 defensive efficiency, was certainly an above average second baseman over the course of his career. Spent 4+ seasons as a starting third baseman for us in his mid to late 30s, where he was a bit below average. Also played first base, shortstop, and left field on occasion. But for most of the past 2+ seasons, he has been a designated hitter for us. Actually, it's been longer than that, as you can see. Even in 2043, when he was still an everyday player for us, he only started 20 games in the field that year. And then these past couple seasons, he's really been a pure platoon DH for us, just randomly playing occasionally at first or third. Or in one case, he also played an inning in left field this past year. Or I guess, yeah, or no, that was a season ago. Turning to how Dashawn Seifu stacks up in baseball history, we'll take a look at the postseason records first. And given that he's played more games in the postseason than any player in history at this point, not a surprise to see Dashawn Seifu all over the leaderboard. Basically, it's Dashawn Seifu, Derek Jeter, and then everybody else as far as the all-time records. But with Seifu, the extent to which he holds some of these all-time records is insane. Career games 161. Nobody else is even over 100. Amazingly, Jeter only 77. Seems like it should be a lot more than that. 683 at bats. 650 by Jeter. Yeah, that 77 number for Jeter can't be right if he's got 650 career at bats. I'm guessing that they didn't catch some of the early years of Jeter's career for some reason. I think some of you have commented on this before, that some of the postseason records don't seem to add up. But Jeter definitely feels like he played in more than 77 postseason games. Runs, amazingly, Seifu didn't catch Jeter. Jeter at 111, number 1 all time. Altuve and Seifu, the only 2 other players with over 100 runs. Career hits, 202 from Seifu, just edging Jeter, the 2 of them with a wide margin on everybody else in Major League history. Total bases, 302 for Jeter, Seifu with 285. The fact that Seifu did not hit too many home runs hurts him in that regard. Singles, Jeter, the all-time leader, 1 more than Seifu, 143 to 142. But now we're going to get into some ridiculous numbers. Career doubles, 39 for Seifu, 7 more than Derek Jeter. And then the triples are absolutely ridiculous. Mentioned 19 career triples for Dashawn Seifu. His former teammate Joey Moore had 8, but among real players, it's George Brett and Derek Jeter with 5 apiece. And I believe when I had looked into this a few months ago, there was another player who was a bit more surprising, who also had 5 career postseason triples that for some reason OOTP had not picked up in the books. He leads all time with 14 caught stealings, so that is not necessarily a number to be proud of, but he was still successful 76 times, and those 76 steals are more than Kenny Lofton and Ricky Henderson combined. So in terms of postseason stolen bases, Dashawn Seifu's 76 career steals makes him kind of what Babe Ruth once was compared to the rest of the American League in terms of hitting home runs. Just some absolutely incredible numbers put up by Seifu in the postseason over the course of his career. While I was quickly looking at some of this stuff last night when I finished up the episode where we won the World Series, was a little surprised to see that Seifu's running mate in all 5 of those champions, Alexis Barajas, with a 5.44 wins above replacement, is the all-time leader in that category. Taking just a quick look at Barajas over the course of his playoff career, 15-8 with a 3.42 ERA, over 200 strikeouts in 202 and 2/3 innings pitched, 127 ERA plus, 77 FIP minus, and a 2.85 Sierra. So although Barajas has only won one Series MVP award over the course of those 5 World Series victories, like Mr. Seifu, he has been a pretty big-time postseason performer for us. And single season-wise, since we're talking about some of our players, Joe Scott with 7 saves in our World Championship a year ago, and Floyd Auclair with a ridiculous 18.6 strikeouts per 9 innings, also in our championship last season. So Seifu can certainly argue that he is one of the greatest postseason performers in Major League history, and he's got the numbers over an extended period of time to back it up. As far as some of the counting stats, we've already highlighted a few of them, but we'll do a little quick analysis here of where he fits in the course of Major League history over his 20 seasons in the majors. Runs all time, he ranks 22nd overall, 1,792 career runs. Everyone who is ahead of him in runs scored, except for Barry Bonds and Pete Rose, is in the Hall of Fame. I've already gone off on the Hall of Fame and the fact that the greatest player that I ever watched with my own eyes, Barry Bonds, and the all-time hit leader, Pete Rose, are not in the Hall of Fame. So I will get off my soapbox. But certainly in very strong company as far as his runs scored. Hits, he ranks 17th overall with those 32 and 29 hits in the top 20 overall, and certainly ahead of some very prominent names: A-Rod, Tony Gwynn, Robin Yount, George Brett, Cal Ripken Jr. Very lofty company for Mr. Seifu there. Doubles and triples, I think I can say it like this, and this really puts the uniqueness of Seifu's career in perspective, because there are 3 players in Major League history who rank in the top 10 all-time in doubles and triples. And they're Ty Cobb, Tris Speaker, and Dashawn Seifu. So the type of career that he put together is really unlike anything any person alive today has ever seen. Career doubles, one of 5 players all time with over 700 doubles, 703 in his career, behind just Speaker, Rose, Musial, and Cobb. And then career triples, would have loved if he had gotten to 200, but it really would not have changed what he did over the course of his career. Ranks 8th overall with 197, and Cobb and Speaker, whose careers both ended in 1928, their careers finished up 98 years before Seifu ever played a game of Major League Baseball. And in terms of the timing of when they got their last triples, they are his closest contemporaries among any of those top 10 players all time in triples. Putting the 197 that Seifu put together in a more recent historical perspective, it was 20 more than Stan Musial, who is the highest ranked player that was actually alive while I was alive. It was 31 more than Roberto Clemente, who actually played Major League Baseball, albeit briefly, while I was alive. And then when you think about players that I actually watched with my own eyes, we have to go to Willie Wilson with 147 and his career that ended in the mid-1990s for the most recent player. And he's 50 behind what Seifu did over the course of his career. So the number of triples that Seifu put together were incredible. And then there's the steals. We already talked about leading the league in steals 15 consecutive seasons. Only Ricky with more than him, 104 more for Ricky Henderson over his brilliant career. But Seifu easily eclipsed Brock and Hamilton and Ty Cobb, as well as Tim Raines, to be number 2 all time. And the one thing that I will note here, Seifu was incredibly efficient on the base paths, 2nd all time with 1,302 career stolen bases. When we look at the caught stealings, you see Cobb and Henderson and Brock and a lot of those big names near the top of the list that we talked about, also up there in caught stealings. We have to go way down this list to number 55 overall to see where Dashawn Seifu ranks, tied with Joe Kelly and Rabbit Moranville with 197 all-time caught stealings. So 55th overall in career caught stealings, 2nd overall in successful stolen bases. So Mr. Seifu was incredibly efficient on the base paths. And in WAR, a little further down the list, but still 32nd overall, ahead of the likes of Joe DiMaggio, Harmon Killebrew, Albert Pujols, Derek Jeter, Johnny Bench, Ken Griffey Jr., Wade Boggs, Charlie Gehringer. So very lofty company for what Dashawn Seifu did over the course of his career. And I mentioned that we gave Seifu the name the new Fordham Flash because he was a second baseman coming out of Fordham nearly a century after Frankie Frisch did. And we look at what Frankie Frisch did over the course of his career. Almost 2,900 hits, 466 doubles, 138 triples, a career 316 hitter, almost a 48 career WAR, and of course a Hall of Famer in 1947. You look at what Dashawn Seifu did over the course of his career, and I don't think it is any insult to what Frankie Frisch did over the course of his career for us to having referred to Dashawn Seifu as the new Fordham Flash. So whether you look at the counting stats, whether you look at what he did in the postseason, whether you look at what he did in terms of his rankings on the all-time leaderboards, it seems to me a pretty clear-cut case that Seifu should be a first-ballot Hall of Famer. The only thing where he's a little weak is some of the awards. 4-time All-Star, 4-time Silver Slugger, and 2-time Gold Glover does not necessarily scream Hall of Famer. It more screams the Hall of Very Good, particularly with the fact that he doesn't have a regular season MVP award or a Rookie of the Year award or those type of awards either. But I do tend to think that he should be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And we'll find out in about 5 years whether he ends up a first ballot Hall of Famer. That could be certainly several weeks of game time for us to get there. I'm as interested in finding out whether it happens or not as many of you are. But it's been a lot of fun playing Seifu for these last 20 years with the Buffalo Wings. I love the fact that he was a number 1 overall pick that really panned out. I love the fact that his career arc with the level of doubles and triples and stolen bases is really a combination that we've never seen before in Major League history, for at least those of us who aren't 120 years old. And we'll find out in a few seasons whether my thought that he should be a first ballot Hall of Famer is actually accurate or not. So I appreciate those of you who are still watching here and have kind of indulged me in this trip down memory lane with Dashawn Seifu. In our next episode, we'll do our typical full recap of the 2045 season. After that, we'll dig into our farm system, take a look at how some of the former players on our team are performing around Major League Baseball. And in both of those episodes, we'll start talking about and formulating our plan for next season, because now that we've got our first repeat out of the way, it's time to try to figure out a plan to hopefully get our first three-peat. And we'll start discussing who on the team is going to be back for that three-peat attempt and who we might be moving on from this offseason in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.